off, and we were just speaking a moment ago. We're going to look at some of the thoughts of Joseph Campbell, and we cover so many subjects, and it's mind-boggling. I took out some. I have hundreds of these books with things written in them, and I looked at some of them today. They go back, to the Buddha stuff, some of the stuff. It's amazing the number of subjects that we've discussed, but I think that's been part of our growth, is that it's been advantageous for us as people to look at a lot of different things and a lot of different subjects and not run from anything, not to stay with the same thing, but to open ourselves. And in this particular thing that Joseph Campbell was talking about, he used a theme which I think from a scientist's standpoint would be the one becomes two. I think this would probably be appropriate for you, Albert, as a cell. And you can see these under a microscope, and the cell starts to quiver inside, and then things start to happen, and whatever happens, and then the next thing you know, you got two of them sitting there. What do they call that? I don't know what they call it, but one becomes two. And yeah, and in the Bible, what do we run into? In the very earliest parts of the book of Genesis, we run into that very same thing. In Genesis 2:22, it says that the rib that the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman. And the man's name just happened to be Adam. And of course, we know that's Adam. We've gone through this a thousand times, and I won't dwell on it tonight. But basically, what we saw here was the splitting of the atom, and then the same thing took place. The one became two. The one became two. See? So here, there's a story from the Upanishads, which is a Hindu book of Krishna. And it's interesting. It says, in the beginning, the universe was nothing but the form of man. It looked around and saw nothing but itself. Its first shout was, "It is I." And thus arose the concept of I. And of course, that's what we discussed this morning. Was very important in the discussion that we had this morning, this question of I am. But then the story goes on from the Upanishads. It says, I was afraid, but since there's no one here, who should I fear? Whereupon fear departed. So there's the earliest mind, the form of man all alone, seeing only itself, and seeing itself and saying, it is I. Okay? So then, where were we this morning? Here we see this thing from the Upanishad saying that all there was in the very beginning was I. Okay? And here we saw in Exodus 3:13, we discussed this morning, and God says, when they say, what is his name? What shall you say? Say, I am has sent me. And so God then, in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, identifies the name of I. I am. I exist. And the Upanishad said that in the very beginning, all there was I. So these two are very consistent. Something starts, and at that main focal point, at the eons of time, it is I. And then, of course, in John 10:30, Jesus makes the statement that this that we're talking about, I and the Father are one. In other words, I and God are the same thing. And so then the name of God is I am. And the interesting point is that you can't then say the name of God without revealing its importance and its residency within yourself. In the Upanishads, it goes on, and it's interesting, and this ancient Eastern stuff is very interesting anyhow, and it says, the self desired a second. In other words, here's I, all alone in the universe, and I becomes the self. Now the self has a desire for a second. The self then divided itself into two parts. The male embraced the female, and the human race developed. So what's being said was that out of this single cell, there came a separation, and the one became two. And I think as a scientist, you would have little trouble with that, scientifically. Would you? Okay. And basically, I'm sure that you've seen that type of a thing many times under a microscope, and it transcends itself back from a microscope in a laboratory back to the eons of time, where the very same principle occurs. Then the Upanishads goes on and says, she then became a cow, and he became a bull. She then became a goat, and he became a buck. She then became a sheep, and he became a ram. And they paired and named all things down to the ants. Thus, then he realized, I am creation. See, that's beautiful. That's what we miss when we read things or see things like from Joseph Campbell. We really have never gotten into the depths of his wisdom and his understanding, and and it's so beautiful, and it is so biblical. That's what I always heard when I first started off in religious circles. The thing was, well, we got to make sure that this is biblical. This is 100% biblical. There was I, or I am. And then the development of itself as it split. So the point that's being made here is she became a cow, he became a bull, and blah, 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 is that everything is a manifestation of that single inhabiting divine substance called I. Whatever form it may take. It would take a human form, may take a plant form, may take an animal form. It all is part of the substance of I, splitting itself apart and then making itself into a male and female part. Now, this is I think the biblical part of this we can approach again. When we think of this, we look at this central part, I. Let's look at it one more time. Let's take it as here is I, and then I splits itself apart, and now we have two. We have male and female. That looks a little grotesque. We have I and then male and female. So we have two parts as it splits itself asunder. Now look at Genesis. Go to page 4 in the little Bibles that you have, and look at something and see if it doesn't say the same thing in so many words. In Genesis chapter 5, on page 4, what does it say? This is the book of the generations of Adam in the day that God created man. In the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, blessed them, and called their name Adam. Okay? That's the interesting part. In other words, this is the I, this is the I am, this is male and female, but it's the same I. It is one, say. And so what has happened, though, as the evolution of this entire thing takes place in a very, would you say, atomic way, the one becomes two, as Campbell was trying to convey to us. Male and female created he them and called their name Adam. That's a really dynamic piece of scripture that most religious people have totally ignored. He made them male and female and called their name. It didn't say he called them Adam and Eve, does it? So he called their name Adam, male and female. You see. And as we sit in this room and as you sit on television and watching on television wherever you are, everybody is male and female. There's not one person, there's not one thing that is not male and female. Everything's male and female. See. Now, okay, so there's what we've got. We've got this thing called I. It manifests itself, splits apart. We have male and female. And then, of course, the progression begins, and, we have creation. And then something happens. We get, biblical symbolisms of serpents and Cain and Abel's and all kinds of sons of God intercoursing with the sons of men, and all this chaos starts. Something starts to go downhill. Something goes wrong. Look. If you're going to be realistic about it, and if you're going to be fair about it, you're going to have to say that as far as the creation of the world is concerned, if this is an all-knowing God who has everything under control, something bad happened. He either made a terrific mistake or turned his back on the entire thing, if there was such a thing as a creation of that type. Something crept into creation and trouble began, and Zoroaster was the first one to identify the source of the trouble, and he said it was darkness, he said it was lies, and he said in addition to darkness and lies, there were accidents. Darkness, lies, and accidents, and all hell broke loose. Whether it be sickness, whether it be wars, whether it be the individual guilts and fears and rapes and pillaging and all of the things that we see, something crept into this pristine beauty of creation and turned it upside down and caused serious problems, okay? The Hindus agreed with them. They didn't say necessarily that darkness developed. They just said something went wrong. You know, it's like that airplane that just fell out of the sky. All anybody knows is something catastrophic occurred and something went terribly wrong. And that's what both of these voices said. That creation was a nice idea. There was such a thing as the eye or the atom, and it split itself apart, and there was this development of all different species and the names and all of that, but something went wrong. And there was a lot of unhappiness, and much of the world that you live in has dwelled in unhappiness for eons of time. In fact, let me show you how the Bible phrases it. You wonder who sat down and wrote this thing, but I mean, here you've lived in the time of atomic wars, you lived in a time of cancer and AIDS and all the different things. You live in a time of violence and people shooting each other and bombing each other. And let's go back thousands and thousands of years before we got out with atomic bombs and all this stuff. And look at page 5 again in the book of Genesis. And it's an interesting comment in there in the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 6. And look at verse 6. And what does it say? It repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. In other words, God is saying, this was a stupid idea. I never should have done this. What the heck did I do? Now he's got them breeding like rabbits, and they're all shooting each other and bombing each other. And he's saying, why? But it's in the Bible. Say, it's in the Bible. It says it repent. In other words, what does that say? What does this Bible say? This is your holy book. This is the Word of God. You know what it's saying in so many words in 1994? It didn't go like it was intended. This isn't what I had in mind. So if that would be the case, you got a God who made the whole thing and said, no, something got screwed up here. This isn't what I wanted to do. Made a mistake or something happened, you know, because he's pacing around in his celestial chamber saying, what the heck happened? This is screwed up. Okay. Now, Zoroaster then comes along and makes a statement. Whoever it was, whether it was God screwed it up or people screwed up, Zoroaster stated, in spite of the error, and there was error, the earth must be redeemed through man. In other words, Zoroaster says the change that must be made cannot come from a God, cannot come from a sacred book. It has to come from the heart of human beings. That's where the change has to come from. And I think we understand that that's correct. And I think much of the time that we have spent trying to ask God to change things has brought us to this place of realizing that we are I am, we are the God, and we're the ones that have to change it. So, remember what I was saying to you some time ago when I was at Sarah Kiefer's daughter's wedding, and they asked me to say the blessing, and I said to everybody, I'm going to say the blessing on this place, so I'm going to pray to you. Because if you people who are sitting in this room will put forth joy and peace and fun and gladness, we'll all be blessed. If you won't, we're going to have a nasty time here. And they all did it, everybody, and they had fun, so that means, but where did the blessing come from? It didn't come from somebody floating on a cloud. It came from the people sitting in there. That's what Zoroaster's saying. It is people that have to change if this error is to be corrected. That's what Zoroaster said. Okay. The ancients of the East said that what went wrong was mankind lost contact with himself. That's a pretty significant thing and quite true. Because, you know, we've all, in all of our lives, until recently when we started coming together and talking about these things, we didn't think much about ourselves. We thought about, you know, what group. I was speaking to a woman today, and I don't know what her name was, but she was here this morning, and she was talking about a particular denomination that she had been a member of, which you two sitting in the front will be very familiar with. And she said all she ever did was go in, and they had a committee to do this and a committee to do that, and she got up at the last time, and she said, does anybody ever talk about God in this place? You know, and now she's realizing that, you know, committees or churches or whatever, that's what created the problem, but it is from within ourselves that this emphasis must come. So, in other words, what is being said by these ancient people is that the entire journey is for man to seek to find himself, and in so doing correct the error. Mustafa, who is one of my and Joan's close friends from New York, a Sufi Muslim, said what we have to do is enter back inside of ourselves and retrace our steps and find out where we made the wrong turn. And he says if we'll do that, then we'll come back to the point of origin, and then we can get it straight, which makes a lot of sense, okay? Because what we have done in all of our lives and in our history and our religions, we've always desired outside of ourselves. And then as a result, that which was created fell, because we've always looked for some God hero or a Christ. And so then Jesus comes along, Jehoshua comes along, and in Matthew 6:33, he echoes these people, or these voices, and what does he say? Seek first the kingdom. So then he's telling us, that's right, you've got to look for something. And then he goes on to say, hey, Luke 17:21, it's within you. So Jesus comes along, Jehoshua comes along, and he says the same thing. He says you've got to look within yourself before you do anything. What we've gotten backwards is we've read the Bible, then we'll go and we'll start meditating on the Word. That screws it all up. That's not what we were supposed to do. He said look first within yourself, then read the Bible. Did you want to say something? Would you stand up, please, and make your brief statement? You turn around and face the jury.
Now I have the microphone. Going back to what you just said about Mustafa and saying that, we have to return to find where we went wrong on the journey. I look at things a little bit different, and I was thinking this morning when you were talking too. The way we proceeded on the journey before we found you and our so-called church, we would never have known this. In other words, we went because that's all we knew, and we didn't know any better. Now, when we found you, now we have a comparison, and we find that this is the right path to take. Whereas before, we had no idea because we didn't know where the right path was. We just proceeded because we thought that was the thing to do. Mm-hmm. That's and interesting. Also, when we were in that mainline religion, which was fine because it brought us on the journey to here, we went to the so-called Bible studies on Wednesday nights. And Albert and I have to say this, he and I knew there was something wrong because we started being very rebellious, and we drove everybody nuts because we said, what you're saying doesn't mean what it says. But we didn't know what it was that it meant, you see? Now you explain it, which brought us on, again, this path that we didn't know was there. But we were dealing with people that said, oh, well, I read the Bible 3 times a year. Well, you read the Bible 3 times a year, but if you don't know what the Bible is talking about, that doesn't do you any good or us any good. And this is what we were dealing with. Am I correct? And they thought the way to solve all the world's problems was just to blow it up in a nuclear explosion. And we had someone, I thought he was going to have a heart attack one night when this person said that she believed that there should be a nuclear holocaust to rid the world of evil. And I thought he was going to jump all over her.
She'd go with it.
Well, she didn't care, but that was the point. She didn't care, you see, because this was the way her mind worked, and her family was of this opinion, and we just couldn't deal with this, and that's how we proceeded to here. And
Yeah.
we wouldn't
Yeah.
know that this was the right path.
I understand.
If we had been on this path in the first place, how would we know there was any, if there was something else that we had missed? This way we knew that we hadn't missed anything because we found you.
Good. Well, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. I think that's a genuine need. I'm glad Ethel related to that because that goes also with people who say, don't worry about me, I haven't been there, but I meditate. Well, it's in the same thing. If you don't understand what the instructions are, how do you know what to expect or what manifests within you or what it's all about? You don't. And I also think that what Ethel scored on a point there was if we say that all we have to do is get inside of ourselves and trace our steps backwards. Well, that's true, but you have to have some knowledge as to what you're looking for, which, where when you start tracing yourself backwards, how do you know when you've arrived at that point where you then can start finding the path? So that was a real good statement. Okay. Something then was terribly wrong. Now, just think for a moment, those of you here and those watching on television, Zoroaster said something was wrong. The people of the East, the Hindus, said something went wrong. Jesus obviously was saying something wrong. Here's Ethel, now this is a microcosm of it, saying that when her and Albert were in this particular place, they were listening to this stuff, but they knew that something was wrong. In the same way, something was wrong. And that there had to be a corrective. The course, in somehow or other, has to be corrected. And so then Jehoshua, Jesus, comes along and says, we correct the course by looking within ourselves, separating from thought, and rising above these types of thought. Because all of the thoughts that he's asked us to rise up above are the thoughts that have been placed in us by those who are on the wrong course, you see. And we're not saying, none of us are here saying, oh, we've got the right answer and they were wrong. We're saying, no, God has the right answer, but God dwells within us. And so we have to then take this course which is wrong and abandon it and look within ourselves as Jehoshua, Jesus, instructed us to find the right course. Now, let's pursue that. That was good. Let's pursue it a little bit with the help of Mr. Campbell. God bless him. And in our tradition, there are three communities that are convinced they are the favored ones. We have the Jewish community, we have the Christian community, and we have the Muslim community. Each of these communities are absolutely convinced, without any shadow of any doubt, that they are favored. Each supposing, Jewish community, Christian community, Muslim community, each supposing to have been authorized by a particular revelation from God. Whether it came from Moses, whether it came from Jesus, whether it came from Muhammad, each one of them had a particular revelation that was exclusively for them. Okay? And each one will tell you that their way is the way and the only way, and the rest of you are in trouble. So what happens according to each of these groups, and it goes back to what you said about the lady with the atomic bomb, is that the world is corrupt, man is a sinner, but through his involvement in the authorized community, that person is saved to participate in the glorious kingdom of God. But the person is saved only by being part of the authorized community. So you flip the coin and say which it is, you see. And basically, these are the things that we have to deal with. It says in Revelation 12:10, now has come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God. And each one will use that particular reference. But our God is our God. Our God is our God. Our God is our. In other words, the Muslims do not believe it's going to come from the Christian God. And the Jews certainly don't believe it's going to come from the Muslim God. See? And the Christians believe that the Jews are God's chosen people, but still they're not saved. They're the only ones that are saved because they signed the card. And so there you have it. And everybody is in their particular tribal camp beating their drums and circling the fire and saying that they have the answer. They have the way. Okay. Now let's move away from this a little bit and go to the visions of the East and the visions, say, for instance, of India. Not condoning any types of lifestyles in any way, shape, or form, but I'm looking at an idea. Because what we've looked at there, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, we're looking at ideas. These are all ideas of people as to what salvation is. In India, there is no place to look for God. And the reason there's no place to look to God is because it's not that God is everywhere, it's because the God is everything. The divine is everything that exists. So one doesn't require an authorized community. There is no authorized community to become a part of. God is everything, and so he cannot be outside of anything. In other words, one of the fallacies of the Christian involvement is they say you must pray for Jesus to come into your heart. which would mean that he's not in your heart, which then would mean he can't be God, because then he's outside of something. If he's not inside of you, then there is a place in the universe where he doesn't exist. So then he can't be God. Say, do you see what I just said? If you're asking him to come in, it means he's not there. And if he's not there, then it means that there's a part of the universe where he doesn't exist, so then he can't be God. So that's a problem, but that's for another time. What then does the Hindu or the ancients from India say happens? They say that one has to alter one's psychological orientation and recognize what is within. And so then from this particular sect, we get away from the revelation aspect of some divine hero, and we bring this thing of salvation to what? Psychology. Psychology. The workings of the mind. Now, Jehoshua the Christ, Jesus, he didn't follow the Jewish community at all. They killed him. He didn't follow the Christian community because there was no such thing. And he certainly didn't follow the Muslim community. What did he follow? He said in Luke 11:52, you take away the key when you don't enter within yourself. Then he's following the Hindu philosophy. I'm not saying he's a Hindu. I don't really care whether he's a Hindu or what he is, but I'm saying the philosophy or the idea that he espoused was the one that was the Hindu philosophy. You take away the key when you don't enter within yourself. And he said that's what you have to do. You have to enter within yourself. In Hindu, those people who do not see this are said to be affected by maya, M-A-Y-A. And maya means delusion. In other words, the delusion is it is all contained within yourself. If you're looking at your house and looking at the chaos at your house, look inside of yourself. Because that's not what we'll do. We'll always find somebody that's responsible for it. When we exclude ourselves, that's what religion does. Christianity, whatever religion it is, they don't look inside their own house and say, maybe we're responsible for this. You don't see the Pope or you don't see the rabbi. You don't see, maybe it's our church that's screwed up. Maybe we're teaching the wrong thing. You never say that. They always say it's those people, the sinners. Say. Same thing we do in the house. All hell's breaking loose in the house, and we look to find out who's causing it and never include ourselves as possibly the source of the chaos. So, there are two ways to consider. So let's look at it. We have Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and we'll come down here, Hindu, ancient East Indian, whatever you want to call it. Two ways to consider. And this one here, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, there must be a historical event to restore man to the divine. The Messiah is going to come, Muhammad's going to do something, Jesus is going to come. There has to be a historical event or you're lost. You see, I was talking to somebody, I don't know if it was Dennis or who I was talking to, but something came into my mind that I thought was extremely interesting. And what it is evolution. The hardliners who were in the Christian community that came out of the European King James, or I don't know whether we should call him Queen James now, but anyhow, that come out of that community, they're all dead. And as evolution, or as the period of time came, people started to drift a little bit away from the church, and the older people who stayed there died. And so now you start to have people who are not quite as deeply involved in it as they were, and then they'll die. And then before you know it, you have people who aren't involved in it at all. And this whole thing suddenly gets wiped away, right off of the face of the earth. It's the way all institutions go. Those people that originate them, it's what happens. You go over to the Soviet Union. Who comes out during May Day? They got some little old guy with a red star on his chest and a raven and a red Lenin flag. It's all that's left. They're all dead. Everybody else is rapping and singing rock music and drinking whatever. It's an interesting thing. Of course, this isn't funny, but we preach against drinking alcohol. It's a sin, going out hanging in bars. This terrible airplane accident, There was a guy that was on his way to the plane, and he stopped off to have a drink, and he started getting, and he had about 3 or 4 beers, and he missed the plane. Sitting at the bar, he said, oh my God, I missed the flight. So what do you say to that? Well, he shouldn't have gone to the bar. It's a good thing he went to the bar. What saved him? The bar. Figure that one out. Take that to church Sunday morning. We'll have a discussion about that next Sunday night. You'll be the interlocutor for that one, Mr. Miro. Oh, my. So anyhow, here, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim say there has to be a historical event. What is Christianity looking for? Jesus to come back. That's it. And the nuclear war that you're talking about. That's their historical event. I'm not really too sure what the Muslim event is. Jewish are looking for the Messiah. But they're looking. In fact, there's a sect in New York that was totally convinced that the Rabbi Menachem Shershin was the Messiah. The man died. He died. But, you know, that's maybe somebody else. But anyhow, that's what is contained. You people who were raised as Christians, your whole life was built around waiting for the second coming of Jesus. And you know, even when I was a kid up and I used to hang out in the streets of Newark, there were people on the corners, the second coming. Here's a guy very recently in California is one of the leading Bible teachers on family radio named Mr. Campion. Predicted the fiery end of the world on September the 6th. It's September the 11th. They do it constantly. And now he'll probably say, well, you know, I might have been off a little bit, but, you know, they never stop doing it. The whole, and they'll say, this isn't a kind of a thing that you want to spiritually hope happens. It's ridiculous, because it'll never happen. That's not what God is. God is love and healing, not destruction and atomic bombs and that lunacy. But people follow that lunacy. Okay, the historical event is what is anticipated in the Jewish and Christian and Muslim community. In the Hindu, man is displaced by a psychological factor, so psychology must be the vehicle to return man to a sane mind. That's the difference. There will be no historical event. Man must renew his mind. And that's what the Bible says. Be renewed in your mind. And I can tell you in my mind, and I'm sure you can tell me in your mind, that's where the trouble is. It is all there. The scenarios that are created in my mind of all of the chaos and all of the things that are going to go in the toilet are bizarre. That's the way it is. And you've got to be willing, and you've got to be willing to talk about these things. So what does Jesus? Does Jesus say, you know, I'm going to come back on a white horse? No, he never said such a thing. So he doesn't get involved in this at all. He gets involved in this. So what does he say? Practice the single eye. Take no thought. Enter within yourself. Cast your net to the right side. You take away the key because you don't enter within yourself. He lines right up with this Hindu philosophy that it's psychology. The mind, the pineal gland of the brain. Go within yourself. Take no thought. So, okay, let's get rid of this, because we're pretty well sure that that's not going to be the way. We're pretty well sure that it's going to be through the mind and through the psychology of the mind. How does the Hindu philosophy move to a psychological return to the divine? One word. Yoga. The word is yoga. A disciplinary force of the self. Discipline. You know, and we practice it here. Might not be, I can't get myself twisted in those positions because I would never get out of it, but just sitting here, the discipline of sitting still for a half hour is yoga. You're disciplining yourself. I am going to be there no matter what happens, and I'm going to discipline myself into that position for that half hour. That's yoga. And again, Jesus flows in the harmony of this. What does he say? Matthew 11:29. Take my yoke upon you. The root of the word yoke is yoga. Look that up. I mean, I don't believe me about King James. Look it up. That's what it is. And so what he says here, isn't that make sense to you? If he says take no thought, if he says practice the single eye, okay, the kingdom is within you, seek within yourself for the kingdom. You take away the key because you don't enter within yourself. Don't you then think that's very consistent with himself saying, practice my yoga? Discipline yourself. Discipline yourself inwardly. Yoga. And that means to link, like you would yoke an oxen, to link. So that's interesting that with Jeheshua, the Christ, with all of his other attachments to the Hindu philosophy, that renewal comes through the mind, also then uses this word yoke or yoga to talk about the discipline. And I don't see, it doesn't take any fundamentalist much studying to find out that yoke is yoga, and that the single eye is yoga, and taking no thought is yoga, and seeking within inside of yourself is yoga. Why do they have trouble denying such a thing like this? This is what he was talking about. So there's a big difference in concepts. Religion, fundamentalism, brings us to a sacrament or to a covenant in which we get together with God. Yoga is the psychological linking of the mind with that which is the divine aspect which dwells within inside of us. That's what it is. When you practice yoga, you yoke yourself to that which is the divine part of the mind. And that's the beautiful part. You see, in religion, and you know this is true, God and man are linked, but very separate. Very separate. There's a separation. They're different. They're separate, say. The one has become two. In yoga, God and man become one. And so the one that became two, now we see the evolution, don't we? The two becomes one. See? You see what the atom is? God. Split. The two are separated. And man's eternal quest is to break down the barrier, which is called the veil to the holy place, and reunite himself with this divine consciousness which we call God. In Genesis, one became two. The restoration, two becomes one. How? Shakyamuni Buddha, of whom we studied, sat under the Bodhi tree and became enlightened. And the myth and the story goes that he sat under the tree at the north and there was a tremendous earthquake. And he got up and he moved. He sat under the tree to the west and there was a tremendous earthquake. And he got up and he moved. And he sat under the tree to the south and there was a tremendous earthquake. And he got up and he moved. And he sat under the tree at the east and the quake did not occur. There, the earth neither trembles or quakes. There was stillness, and he became enlightened. And it's still there. And there is when we sit under the tree to the east or to the right side, we then have that which is the two becoming one, and the restoration of all things, of God, of man, of woman, all of us together coming back into a oneness, which is happening. And unfortunately, it's difficult to explain to people who have made up their mind. I was with a gentleman last night in New York who had made up his mind, had reached a conclusion about something. Ruth Judkins gave me a letter some weeks ago from a man who outlined different philosophies, and I responded to every one of them, gave it back to her. He came back and he's responding again. I said, well, I'm not going to respond anymore. I mean, this goes on and on and on. He's reached a conclusion. His journey is concluded. But that's his right. And he has every right to feel the way he does and every right to think the way he does. But I will write him one last thing and say, I congratulate you on your philosophies and your feelings. You are entitled to them, and I think that you should fly with them and do whatever you will with them. But there are some of us who believe that the earth is not flat, and we are willing to get onto the Santa Maria and sail off into the sunset and take our shot and see what's on the other side. What do you think?
Good for you. Yeah.
That's what we'll do. Thank you very much for sharing this time with the brilliance of Joseph Campbell. And I just put a little of my own stuff in there, but I admire his work, and you should get all of his books. And although I must say, read them slowly, because it's a little bit difficult to digest it all. If you were going to get a book of Joseph Campbell's, I might suggest, if you want to get into studying mythology, Occidental, which is European mythology, because then you'd find something that you're a little more familiar with. You get into some of the Eastern philosophies and Chinese mythology, it gets a little more difficult. Okay, thanks, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.